I saw the new hit play Giant on Broadway this week. Did anybody see that yet? Oh, we have some people. Anybody going to see it? You should. It's about Roald Dahl, the brilliant author of the celebrated books so many of us grew up with, such as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, Matilda, and many others. The main problem of Roald Dahl is that he was filled with hate, especially for Jews. Some of the dialogue in the play is fictional, of course, but the following words are taken verbatim from Dahl's book review that set off the central tension of the play. Referring to the Holocaust and the Israeli-Lebanese war in the early 1980s, Dahl wrote, "Never before has a race of people generated so much sympathy around the world, and then, in the space of a lifetime, succeeded in turning that sympathy into hatred and revulsion. It's as though a group of much-loved nuns in charge of an orphanage had suddenly turned around and started murdering all the children." And like all good anti-Semites, Dahl didn't forget to accuse what he called powerful Jewish bankers, claiming that American foreign policy utterly dominated by great Jewish financial institutions. What makes the play not only historically interesting, but directly relevant to our times, is that it traces the symbiosis between hatred of Israel and hatred of Jews. The two almost always go hand in hand. Dahl himself admitted it in an interview 8 months before his death in 1990. "I'm certainly anti-Israel, and I've become anti-Semitic," Dahl said, "inasmuch as that you get a Jewish person in another country like England strongly supporting Zionism." At least Dahl was honest enough to admit that he was anti-Semitic, unlike today's Israel haters who cling to this cowardly and disingenuous contention that they're only anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic. Now listen to these words carefully. The same thoughts, the same vocabulary are used today. Never before has a race of people generated so much sympathy around the world, he's referring to the Holocaust, and then in the space of a lifetime succeeded in turning that sympathy into hatred and revulsion. It's as though a group of much-loved nuns in charge of an orphanage had suddenly turned around and started murdering all the children. Okay, but first, Jews aren't a race. We are a rainbow of every color under the sun. You would think that someone as literate and educated as Roald Dahl would take the time to learn that. But more importantly, you think it's about sympathy? You think that the main lesson of the Holocaust is that Jews should just sit back and take it century after century so we can gain your sympathy? And does it take a Holocaust to earn your sympathy? Itself the culmination of centuries of religious bigotry against and persecution of Jews? And what does it say of your sympathy? How heartfelt really was it if within less than a lifetime you revert to that age-old hatred and revulsion? You think it's like suddenly turning around and with no reason murdering children under your care? What? Israel just waltzed into Lebanon with no reason? And you equate Palestinian terrorists who were lobbing projectiles and murdering Israeli citizens for years with innocent children under Israel's care? And you expect Israelis to act as nuns? So typical of anti-Semites, then and now and forever, to shamelessly or blindly practice a kind of infuriating moral inversion. It was the PLO that was murdering children in the 1980s, Israeli children. As Hamas does today, it's Hezbollah that seeks to wipe Israel off the map. Israel has no claim against Lebanon. There are peace negotiations going on now. Peace could be achieved in 1 week of negotiation. If Iran had not hijacked a state called Lebanon, as the PLO did in the 1980s, and used it to further its genocidal ideology of destroying and massacring Jews. Spare us your sympathy and your crocodile tears. Just grant us what every individual and nation deserves: dignity and security. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir once said, "If we have to choose between being dead and pitied and alive with a bad image, we'd rather be alive with the bad image." Dahl, who was a pilot in the Royal Air Force during World War II, claimed to have purposely avoided targeting a Vichy French airbase in Lebanon because there were civilians in the area, apparently the paramours of the French pilots. See a lot of young people here today. If you don't know what that word paramour means, ask your parents at dinner time. Paraphrasing his own words, Dahl says in the play, "None of us ever fired a single bullet over Lebanon that could have possibly hit a civilian or non-military target." Really? Sounds disingenuous to me. Even the strictest safety precautions do not prevent civilian deaths in war. It's one reason that wars should be avoided in the first place. But even more, the Royal Air Force flattened German cities in massive firebombing raids in World War II. Hundreds of thousands of non-combatant Germans, including tens of thousands of German children, were incinerated by the RAF, Dahl's fellow pilots. You know, the ones who he claimed acted so high-mindedly, characterized in the play as never having fired a single bullet that could have possibly hit civilians. And here's another attribute of anti-Semites: accusing the Jews, often falsely, of what they themselves have done, as if that absolves them of their own transgressions, holding the Jews to standards that no one else is expected to honor. The energy of the play leads to its last scene. Dahl grants an interview to Michael Coren of the New Statesman, and his words are quoted verbatim in the play. He says this: "There's a trait in the Jewish character that does promote animosity. Maybe it's a lack of generosity towards non-Jews. I mean, there's always a reason," he said, "why anti-anything crops up anywhere. Even a stinker like Hitler didn't just pick on them for no reason. I mean, if you and I were in a line moving towards what we knew were the gas chambers, I'd rather have a go at taking one of the guards with me. But the Jews were always submissive. This, to me, is the key. In Dahl's own words, and exists to this very day. The central issue was and remains the exercise of collective Jewish power. Jews are meant to be submissive. This is the reason that God exiled them. To wander the earth, powerless and dependent on the goodwill of their host societies, a constant reminder of God's wrath against them. The very idea of Jewish fighter pilots, Jewish soldiers, Jews exercising collective force in the eyes of some is contrary to the very natural order of things. Jews are supposed to be weak, the plaything of the strong. The shock, the incomprehension of Jews defending themselves as the Brits do, actually much more humanely than them, is what so disorients and disgusts Roald Dahl and his ilk. And not only that, how is it, they wonder, in perplexed disbelief, that this tiny country wins all these wars against hundreds of millions of those who want to? How is it that this tiny country constantly prevails? Jews were always submissive, he insists, like sheep led to slaughter, contrary to Dahl's grandiose perception of himself as the model of British virtue, fantasizing like one of his characters in his children's books at having a go at Nazi guards on the way to the gas chamber. And in any case, if Dahl allows himself to have a go at one of the Nazi guards, why does he deny that same right to Israeli Jews to protect themselves from those seeking to massacre them today? The modern Zionist movement arose as a solution born of Jewish weakness to restore the capacity of the Jews to defend themselves, and in the process to bring an end to the indignity of the millennia-old Jewish condition. It's worth remembering in this week when we celebrate Israel's 78th birthday that Zionism restored the ability of the Jews to protect themselves. Enlightened Europe failed to protect its Jews. It failed miserably, and it's failing today as well. Fighting back is what bothers them. We saw it with clarity after October 7th. Within 2 weeks, the entire narrative changed from those poor Jews massacred again in numbers not seen since the Nazis to accusations of genocide and baby killing, even before Israel began responding in earnest. Baby killing, of course, was one of the most popular blood libels against the Jewish people for centuries. They never forgave us for the genocide committed against us. Dahl himself was not a Holocaust denier. Rather, he profoundly resented that Jews, in his eyes, weaponized Jewish suffering to make others feel guilty. Your ancient wounds you hound like cheap linen, he says in the play. The most frequent question I receive from you and many Jews around the world is, what can we do? What is the most effective way to respond? You remember that old joke in 1939, after Hitler invaded Austria, a Viennese Jew entered a local travel agency desperate to buy a ticket out of Europe. "Where to?" the clerk asked. "Well, can I look at the globe on your desk?" the client said, and he examined the globe and he twirled it around and around, suggesting one country after another. Each time, the clerk raised an objection. "This one doesn't take Jews. This one doesn't like Jews. The waiting list for Jews in this one is 10 years. Finally, the Jew looks up and he asks, "Do you have another globe?" There is no other globe. And America is our home. We cannot escape our problems. They are America's problems too. We must work to make this country better, striving to create a more perfect union. Do what you can, each in your own sphere. Every act counts. Parents in schools, students and faculty in universities, attorneys in the practice of law, journalists and influencers in media, authors and thinkers in books, and rabbis in pulpits. Everyone can make a difference. And support only those political candidates who will be our partners, not opponents. By the way, come to our community forum on May 6th and hear from the main candidates in the Democratic primary for the 12th congressional district running to succeed Congressman Nadler. They'll all be here. I'll have a dialogue with them. But above all else, double down and recommit to Judaism. Double down and recommit to your own Jewish identity. We will be fine if your Jewish identity is fine. We will have Jewish continuity no matter what our enemies wish to do to us, if you want the Jews to continue. And if you want the Jews to continue, you must learn about Judaism and live Jewish lives. Don't just stand from afar and observe Judaism. To observe a thing is not the thing itself. Live Judaism. Love Judaism. Cherish Judaism. Do Judaism. Don't give up on the millennia-old chain of transmission in your family beginning at Sinai that has led to you. I first met Pavel Stransky in Prague when he was 91 years old. He was slight, perhaps a few inches over 5 feet. His short half-beard had turned white long ago. His face was radiant, his eyes were undimmed, and his vigor unabated. On rainy days, he walked with an umbrella in a place of a cane, but his mind was still clear as a bell. Pavel accompanied our group to Theresienstadt, the infamous concentration camp where tens of thousands of Jews died, and where many tens of thousands were transported to Auschwitz and Treblinka. When Pavel was 17, he fell in love with Vera, who was 16. It was love at first sight. He said he couldn't take his eyes off this 16-year-old girl. In 1941, they were both deported to Terezin. Pavel married Vera the night before they were transported to Auschwitz. Our honeymoon was Birkenau, Pavel said. Had Dante seen the ramp in Auschwitz-Birkenau at the end of the night of December 20th, 1943, he would have been ashamed of his sober description of hell. Miraculously, Pavel survived and ultimately made his way back to Prague. The happiest day of my life, he said, was 2 months later. The doorbell rang, and standing in front of me was my Vera. She was a real beauty. He showed me her picture. Somehow, she too had survived Auschwitz. Pavel then described how he and Vera resumed their love affair. They carried on, living long and meaningful lives. Vera died in her 70s. Pavel lived into his 90s. They did everything a couple is supposed to do in life. They laughed, they learned, they rejoiced, they grew old together, they had children, they had grandchildren. Even though Pavel had lost Vera 15 years before we met, it was evident that he still loved her deeply and thought of her every day, many times a day. We lived through a happy marriage without any single stormy cloud in the sky, with beloved and loving children, Pavel said. And later on, we included their wives into these relations, and still later on, of course, our grandchildren. All of them return to us our love and do so now to me. Pavel then turned to me and said, "My grandchildren are not Jewish." In the many years since I've met Pavel, his matter-of-fact statement to me that he and Vera had no Jewish grandchildren stuck with me. I had not pried it out of him. He volunteered the information. I don't know, perhaps in his final years of life, walking the grounds of Theresienstadt, as he had with so many other delegations, he simply took the opportunity to share his thoughts with a rabbi. I never asked him whether he was bothered that his family's long chain of Jewish transmission ended with him and Vera. Some Jews walked out of the camps, determined to repopulate the Jewish world no matter what, and others swore they would never again speak of Judaism or impose on their families this curse of Jewishness. I've met both types of families in my career. I don't know what Pavel's intentions were when he and Vera began raising a family. Sometimes life just unfolds, irrespective of or despite our intentions. And I felt so much love for Pavel, for his courage, his dignity, his humanity, for his strength, his quiet, determined demeanor, undiminished after all these years. Pavel survived and prevailed. He defeated Hitler. He rebuilt his life under the hardships of communist regimes. He was productive. He was accomplished. He lived to see the third generation of Stransky grandchildren bouncing on his knee. And all these years later, I still think of Pavel with tenderness and affection. his matter-of-fact statement that he had no Jewish grandchildren has stayed with me. I don't know what he meant by that, and I'm the last to judge Holocaust survivors. But this I know, in the very depths of my soul, irrespective of the personal decisions of Holocaust survivors that they made for themselves and their families, for the Jewish people, there can be only one response to Jew hatred: to produce a third generation, not only of good people, but good Jewish people. Not only a third generation, but a third generation of Jews. Amen.